So I know some people are still drifting in, but I'm going to go ahead and briefly introduce Donald to you and welcome you to Insight San Diego, coming to a screen near you. This is our, well, we're not saying monthly online Dharma Talk series, but it's pretty close to monthly. And we're happy to have Donald Rothberg back with us. He's taught for Insight San Diego, both in person and online a number of times. And like I said, I'll formally introduce him after he does the meditation. But one quick thing before I turn it over, Donald generously provided a document pertaining to the topic that he's going to be talking about tonight. And he wanted you to have access to it. And so I'll be posting that in the chat, and then I'll probably repost it again later on, just because if people come later, they don't have access to something that I posted before they came. So you should be able to download it or save it to your own computers, hopefully. And if not, you can always cut and copy and paste it. So welcome again. And I will now turn it over to Donald.
Yeah, thank you, Irene. Good to be here. I have actually very fond memories of being in person in San Diego. And I'm up further north in California. I'm in the Bay Area, as many of you know, actually in Berkeley. We're expecting a lot of rain coming in just a little while. And I think it may come down your way in the next day or two. So yeah, we'll start with a meditation, and then the theme of my talk will be on wise speech. And so the material that Irene was referring to is not necessary for the talk, so you don't need to access it to follow the talk or anything. It's really more something to take home that will be related to the talk and have a little bit of the material I cover, but it can be something that you don't look at till after the talk. Not necessary to see it during the talk. Okay, so we'll be starting with a meditation period, and wondering how many people here are either a little rusty in terms of mindfulness practice or relatively new, such that some simple instructions would be helpful. You can raise your hand if that's the case. How many people would benefit from some simple instructions? Okay. Okay, so at least a few. So I think I will give them. And also it seems like we have a lot of fairly experienced people here. So probably, as most of us know, our mindfulness practice generally has two components. And we'll be just in the meditation, just doing basic practice. If there's some way that you practice regularly, you can feel free to practice in that way. We'll probably have about 25 minutes, and you can practice in that way. And I'll also give very basic instructions for mindfulness for those who would benefit from such instructions. As most of us know, the mindfulness practice really has two aspects. The first is settling a little bit more, being less distracted, coming to better capacity to be with what's coming up in experience. And the second dimension is on the basis of that relative stability, cultivating the capacity to see clearly, moment by moment, what our experience is. And the whole idea of the practice is that we, through the development of concentration, we become less distracted, more able to be present to experience, not so caught up in what we might call the automatic mind that just can sometimes take us away for periods of time. The great Thai teacher of the 20th century, Ajahn Buddhadasa, with whom I studied some in Thailand, was asked once what he thought of Western civilization, and he said, lost in thought. And we know that one, and for many of us, including myself, meditation was initially a revelation. Oh gosh, I didn't realize I was thinking all the time, but I was. So the first part, we develop more concentration. And the second part is we see clearly on the basis of greater stability. To develop that greater stability, we typically focus on one area of experience which is relatively neutral emotionally. For many of us, that's the breath. We call the area we focus on the anchor. For many of us, that anchor is the breath, but that wouldn't be the case, for example, if the breath is not emotionally neutral. For example, if there was a history of asthma. And then we might focus on something else that helps us to gain more stability. We'd focus maybe on the hands touching together, or the contact with the chair or cushion, or possibly sound, or maybe the whole body, just being aware of the body. And so the first part of the practice, the developing of stability, we focus on this area of experience we call the anchor that works for you, that works for each of us. If we're with the breath, we would focus on the breath where the breath is easiest to follow. It might be the nostril area, the breath coming in through the nose and out through the nostrils. Could be the upper lip, just being aware of sensations there. Could be the area of the lungs, just being aware of the sensations with the expansion and contraction of the lungs. It could be the belly. And some people like to even keep their hands on the belly just to help them follow and be aware of sensations. Wherever we're focusing on the breath, or maybe the hands touching, or the contact with the chair or cushion, or sound, we stay at the level of sensation. Whenever the mind wanders, we come back. That's the practice. We don't actually even name where we've been. As soon as we notice we're off the anchor, we come back, and we do that over and over again. And in the process, as most of us know, we see all the different ways that our mind goes off the anchor. When there's some degree of stability, which could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or we might be very distracted the whole period and then stay with the anchor. But if there's some stability, we go to mindfulness practice. We stay with the anchor. When the mind wanders, we notice where it's gone, and we make a quiet mental label. For example, planning. I notice a planning thought. As soon as I notice it, it stops. I make the mental note planning softly and come back to the anchor. And in the process, I may give labels to some of my 5 or 10 most prominent kinds of thoughts: planning, remembering, fantasizing, perhaps give a label to discussion with this person, and so forth. When something comes up that draws my attention that lasts a little longer, like I'm noticing some sensations in my shoulder, they're mildly unpleasant. I can stay with them. They're not causing harm. And then I would stay with them as long as they're predominant and not causing any harm. And I could just stay with the sensations. And when they are no longer present, or I'm not sure what's present, I go back to the anchor. Same thing if something comes up that lasts for a while, maybe of an emotional nature. I'm remembering a difficult discussion with a friend that happened yesterday, and I'm going over it. Maybe I'm judgmental of the other person. And I just, as soon as that happens, I bring mindfulness to it. I might bring mindfulness to the emotions. I'm feeling some irritation. It lasts for a while. I stay with it. I may notice how it is in the body, stay there for 30 seconds or a minute. I'll notice the thoughts. When it's no longer predominant, or I'm not sure is predominant, I go back to the anchor. Okay, so those are the basic instructions for really gaining more stability. First, developing concentration, and then secondly, cultivating mindfulness. So we'll practice now for a little over 20 minutes, and I'll give a reminder to come back maybe halfway through. Mostly be in silence. As we continue to sit quietly, keep on coming back when the mind wanders, noticing where you've been, returning to the anchor over and over and over again, which is how the learning and development of concentration, mindfulness, and wisdom and compassion occurs. As we continue to sit quietly, I'd like to invite about 2 minutes of reflection. This would be related to the theme of the talk, which, as probably many or most of you know, is on the theme of wise speech, skillful speech, as part of our practice. And so the question for reflection is, what would you like to learn more about in terms of wise speech? How would you like to develop further in terms of wise and skillful speech? See what comes to you. Take about another minute and a half or so. We have just one announcement, and then we'll go right into the talk and discussion. I'm aiming for to have a fair amount of discussion. So the announcement is about the practice of dana. How many of us are familiar with the practice of dana? How many are not? Okay, it looks like almost everyone's familiar. So I'll be very brief, just to say that, the way that insight meditation is developed in the West works with the concept of dana. Translation would be generosity, and wants to keep the financial or economic dimensions of practice outside of the market, and also make practice and teachings and retreats as accessible as possible. And so there's some centers actually have everything on the basis of dana, where people freely offer, and it's different for people of different means. So some people have less means, and they may go to a retreat like at the Insight Retreat Center and offer less, and those with more means offer more. And it's also been the way that generally teachers have been supported. Almost all of my quote unquote income comes from people offering dana. When I do one-on-one guidance with people, I work with a lot of people regularly, they offer me dana. I don't have a fee. And again, it permits people of different levels of means to be generous, but the amount will look very different. So maybe that's enough to say that there's an opportunity to offer dana for the talk tonight. And I think Irene and others have put in the some of my information in the chat, whether I think whether it's for I think I have PayPal account, Venmo, and did I give my information for sending a check as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's all in the chat, and maybe that's enough to say. Again, people are pretty familiar, and it's the dana is much appreciated. Lets me keep up my elegant wardrobe, as you can tell. So, and so forth. So that's enough. So Irene, if we want to just go right into the introduction to me and the talk, feel free to start.
Okay, thanks, Donald, and welcome again, dear Sangha. I just, before we start, actually, I have a couple of announcements too. I wanted to tell you about a few upcoming events outside of our regular sitting groups and talks. Registration for our April retreat is now open. This is a retreat with Sally Armstrong. It's from April 6th to 10th, and Sally is one of the OGs. She's been teaching for a very long time. She taught our first retreat, and that's going to be held in Oceanside. You can get more information on our website. And we're also very excited to that the Wednesday night sitting group is going to be meeting back in person. We were on, have been on Zoom since COVID, and it's actually been kind of a hybrid, but we're going to be restarting in person at the Unitarian Church in Solana Beach. Again, you can find more information on the website. I think it's the first meeting is going to be March 12th. And possibly be a hybrid, but I don't know if we have the technology for that. And then lastly, we'll be starting a Tuesday noon sitting group, the first Tuesday in March, and that's going to be led by Noriko Morita Harth, who is one of the facilitators of our BIPOC group. And so this is Donald's bio. It's kind of the condensed version because you have access to the long version on our website. He's one of the nation's foremost leaders in socially engaged spirituality. His experience uniquely combines a long record of activism and organizing, extensive teaching and leadership roles in pioneering programs that weave together social action with spirituality. He's on the Teachers Council of Spirit Rock and has been an organizer, teacher, and board member for the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. He has a book, The Engaged Spiritual Life, a Buddhist approach to transforming ourselves and the world, which was named one of the best spiritual books of 2006. And just a few other words, please keep your microphone muted throughout the event. Unless you're asking a question or making a comment during the discussion period. This Dharma talk is being recorded, so none of us are recorded, only the person talking is being recorded. So, but if during the question and response you have a question, then you will be recorded. And if you'd rather not, you can send the question via chat or you can send it directly to Donald. And I am going to venture a guess that if you have a question that doesn't directly pertain to the talk, I'm sure Donald would be happy to answer it. One of the reasons that we offer these online Dharma talks is so that our Sangha has access to teachers, and so please feel free to take advantage of that. And we will post the links for Donald's links for his Dana. Those will be posted several times throughout the talk. So I will now shut up and happily turn it over to Donald. Thank you very much for being back with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irene. Good to be here. You know, I'll do, as I've been teaching on Zoom the last few years, I've developed a way of saying hello. I don't know if anyone sees it, but I like to do a little wave. If you can do it, you can feel free to do it with me if you'd like to. Don't have to. And it's a nice way of, I usually start and end on Zoom, and I hear that some other teachers have adopted it as well. So it's spreading wildly through the Zoomosphere. In any case, as I think most people know, the topic of my talk is cultivating wise speech, its importance in the path of everyday awakening. So I want to explore that, and I think take about the next 30 or 35 minutes in the talk, and then leave plenty of time, at least 15 minutes, for us talking together, asking questions, hopefully manifesting wise speech in our discussion. And I'll be in the talk partly offering some practices that we can do in the moment as we're listening. I think the title really suggests that wise, skillful speech is crucial to our sense of spirituality in daily life, our practice in daily life. And it's quite remarkable that when we have a strong focus and I think training in wise speech, we can, instead of when people ask the question, how's your practice going? You say, oh, it's going well. I do a half an hour a day, a half an hour formal meditation. When we incorporate wise speech in, all of a sudden, we have 5 or 10 hours of practice, if not more, right? And so it can be really central, and it hasn't been taught very much in the West. I may be the person who developed the first retreat on wise speech in the insight meditation world, which I did about 19 years ago. And I've been teaching retreats since then, the last maybe since about 2009 with my colleague Oren Jay Sofer. And we've taught a lot. And I'm going to be offering some of the central material that's been developed over these years. The retreat itself probably has 30 hours of material. So I'm going to do a half an hour on 3 foundations, that are really, really essential. Maybe a starting point also is to acknowledge how much pain and even suffering there is in our lives from unwise speech, and how, particularly with people close to us, we may go in a moment from being relatively mindful and present to unskillful speech. We can get triggered very, very easily and quickly. I remember hearing the teacher Ram Dass once say, with my family, my spiritual practice goes out the window pretty quickly. Does anyone relate to that? And so, yeah, we can very easily be triggered. There's a cartoon that I really like, which illustrates this well from I think it was from the New Yorker. It shows a woman sitting on a couch. In front of her is someone with a pad of paper who looks a little bit like a detective taking notes. Behind the couch, there's another person standing who looks like a police officer. Also behind the couch, one can see on the floor that there seems to be a body with 2 feet sticking up in the air, lying on the ground, lying on the floor. But what the woman tells the detective is this: I misspoke. He misheard. Shots rang out. Anyone relate to that? Things can happen really quickly, right? And it's a powerful, powerful cartoon. On the other hand, a really friendly, warm sentence or two when I'm in difficulty or pain can change everything. One person who listens to me, even for a minute or two, when there's a great need for listening, can be incredibly valuable. I remember being very inspired hearing a phrase from a Jewish theologian, mystic, an activist named Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he actually marched with Dr. King at Selma, 1965. And he had the phrase, holiness in words, which has really stayed with me. Can we have our speech and language be a way of expressing awakening, be touching the sacred? And as I mentioned, this has often not been developed in Buddhist settings with so much emphasis on meditation, which is, of course, valuable, but often been not so much attention, even though, as probably most of us know, skillful speech is one of the 8 factors on the Noble Eightfold Path. But again, not taught very much, maybe a little more recently, but not taught very much. And I don't know if it's happened sometimes in your Sangha, but I've seen many times, maybe especially in larger Sanghas, I've seen this at Spirit Rock, when, practitioners with a lot of history, have got into conflicts and have not been skillful in their speech, or even with Buddhist communities. The community of Amaravati in England, a monastery, with Achan Sumedho as the main teacher, found that even though they were meditating many hours a day, sometimes when they had differences and conflicts, they were not very skillful. They did not have skillful speech. And they invited in people to train them, especially with skillful speech. It's interesting. It's very interesting that that happened. And so the aim really of skillful speech is not only to speak skillfully, but also really to connect our speech and communication with all the other parts of our practice, with mindfulness, with concentration, with the wisdom teachings, and so forth. It's been an interesting area to explore, and some of what I'm going to offer comes directly from the teachings of the Buddha, and some of it comes from my own innovation, developing skillful speech. I think it's very much in harmony with the teachings of the Buddha, but actually there aren't a whole lot of practices that we get from the text. And so when I've taught with other teachers, we have sort of filled out from what we get from the historical teachings and brought in some other ways of understanding, some of which I will share today. And I want to say that my interest in wise speech probably began, I think it was right around 1989, and I was a young practitioner. I'd been practicing about 13 years. And someone close to me told me, Donald, you don't really practice wise speech, do you? And I probably said humph or something like that. But on reflection, I thought that my friend was accurate, that I wasn't giving it much emphasis, as I think most practitioners at that time. So that's really been the birth of my interest, and also in teaching on connecting our practice with social service and social change work. Of course, speech and communication, working with differences and difficulties is crucial. And so that really gave me motivation for developing in this way. So I want to teach about 3 areas of developing skillful speech. The first is to develop more of a sense of being present and aware as we're speaking, developing presence in the midst of speaking. And that'll be what I cover first, and I'll actually give some practices that we can do right in the moment. The second is identifying the 4 guidelines for skillful speech that the historical Buddha gave, which are very simple and very, very helpful. And then thirdly, I want to talk some about developing more of a sense of mindfulness and how to work with especially difficult thoughts and emotions that come up in the midst of speech. So those are the three areas. I'll cover those and then open things up to discussion. So developing a sense of presence and in the middle of speech, I sometimes talk about this as developing relational mindfulness or relational awareness. How can I be present, not simply in the automatic thought realm when I'm talking, when I'm listening? How many of us know that tendency when we're talking and speaking just to be totally in a mental realm? How many know that as a very dominant tendency, very strong? That's what we're countering. We're wanting, because when we're in automatic mind, we don't pick up so much on what our emotions are or what's going on, whether I'm going into reactivity, whether I'm irritated or angry, I'll just keep on going. And so developing a sense of presence and even a sense of mindfulness can be really, really crucial. So we're not in that automatic thought. We can practice it in very simple ways. And it's easier to practice when we're not needing to speak, like we're in a listening role, like all of you are now. You can keep some presence. And what I find is that some body awareness is really key to developing presence. And much more generally, I find that developing body awareness is central to developing mindfulness in daily life. But it's also really crucial for wise speech. And so all that we do that helps us be more grounded in the body, whether it's yoga or qigong or really being mindful when you take walks, is going to be really helpful. So right now, I'm the only one talking, and you can try to have a little bit of presence. We start maybe by just feeling your hands. Have 20 or 30% of your attention on your hands as you're listening. Over time, this will develop relational awareness. It can feel awkward at first, but as we do it more and more, it can feel more natural. And for myself, I actually had a period of practice. I was working, I was being mentored to be a teacher by John Travis. Anyone study with John? Know John? Probably some of you. He was based out in Nevada City in California. And John gave me a practice to be aware of my whole body, which I did as a main practice for 4 years, which was really revolutionary. I did it. I was aware of my whole body when I would do a retreat, when I would do my meditation. And over time, it sort of burned an awareness of the body into my moment-to-moment consciousness. So I could really access it easily. Right now, I can teach and I can be aware of my whole body. It took time, but over time, we can develop this capacity and it changes so much. So right now, be aware of the hands or be aware of the feet, maybe touching the ground or the floor. See what works for you. Particularly some body awareness can really, really be helpful. The easiest way to develop it, again, recognizing that it can feel a little bit awkward when we're first developing it, maybe even right now. It feels a little bit like maybe attention is divided. How many people feel that a little bit? That's natural. Over time, that shifts. And it just becomes like a natural way. Like I can be aware of my body now as I'm talking, and it doesn't feel like my attention's divided. It's just one. The easiest way to develop this capacity for presence is when we're not having to be active. It's harder when we're actively speaking. So practice developing this when you're listening to a talk, you're at a meeting where you don't have to do much. You can even develop this watching a movie. How does that sound? Watch a movie and develop presence. Watch a movie, I'm sorry, develop this capacity when you're just listening to a friend most of the time. Okay, so that's the first foundation that I want to identify, which makes all sorts of difference. It'll connect with the third foundation. When we have some relational awareness, we're also much more likely to be aware of what's happening in the middle of speech. We're more likely to have the capacity for mindfulness, even as we're engaged with another, which is not easy, but it depends on that relational awareness. The second foundation is the main, really the main offering from the historical Buddha. And this is where the Buddha gave 4 guidelines for right speech or skillful speech. There really can be understood as ethical guidelines. The guidelines were to be truthful, to be helpful, to come out of a kind heart, and to have appropriateness of what we're saying, particularly to have good timing. And so the key for all of this is that all 4 of them have to be together. We have to bring together being truthful, being helpful, coming out of a kind heart, and having good timing. If we don't have good timing, we could still have the other 3 together and it can still be a mess, right? And so these are 4 guidelines. I'm going to say a little bit about each of them. What they really are is a set of guidelines that help us to practice probably in 2 main ways. Number 1, they give us some guidelines for our behavior. So I can go into a meeting and have the intention to follow these guidelines. Or I might just focus on one of them. For example, at a time when I was teaching a lot on this, I had the guidelines. I think I still have them by my telephone in my study. And I would hear the telephone ring. And I'd say before I picked it up, truthful, helpful, good heart, good timing, hello. I would do that as a practice. You could do something like that. You could have the guidelines up there. I actually once worked with, I taught at a graduate school for a number of years, and the graduate school teachers were having communication problems, which they recognized. And so naturally, what did they do? They set up a committee. And I was asked to be on the committee. And I mentioned the 4 guidelines, and it resonated with people. And so they had me, for our faculty meetings, get up at the beginning of every meeting, talk about the 4 guidelines, like in 5 minutes, and put them on a poster paper and put them on the wall of the front. And I think it made a difference. We had people who normally would be seen as not very skillful, and they would start what they were saying by this: I'm not sure that I meet these guidelines, but here, and they would talk. And so the guidelines can be used as sort of helping us guide our behavior. They can be used in groups. They could be used in online gatherings. You know, I sometimes do mediations, and I use them as very central when I do mediations. The second really main function of the guidelines is to really support our mindfulness, such that if I notice myself, let's say, not being entirely truthful, like exaggerating something, or not being fully disclosing of something, I could then, if I'm working with the guideline, I could actually say in a moment, let me be mindful. What's going on right now? What's happening? So they can be used in those 2 ways. So a little bit about each of the guidelines. The guideline of truthfulness, like really, like I was really implying, is there both to have us notice if we're actually telling outright lies, but also to let us know when I'm exaggerating or omitting something or giving half truths. What's going on for me when I do that? And, am I not wanting to share something? Am I not wanting to face something painful? And the lack of truthfulness, of course, is very disruptive of trust. I mean, uh, this is true interpersonally. This is true when you have, shall I say, government officials who uniformly or very commonly lie, which can happen. Has anyone noticed? There can be lying in public places, and it just disrupts trust. It just disrupts connection. And if I myself am telling a lie, it takes enormous energy to sort of compensate. I have to make all sorts of adjustments. And so, like I say, the all of these guidelines are there both for interpersonal communication, and they also are guidelines that can let us look at the social world. And we know that governments always have had a certain degree of lying, maybe to prevent certain truths from coming out. I think we don't have to look very far to see that, going back generations. The second guideline is on being helpful. This is really partly, as the Buddha taught it, it was to check our intention. Am I really trying to be helpful, or are there ways that I'm being negative or being harmful, creating division? Am I saying things which can be hurtful to others, and so forth? And so it's really pretty straightforward guideline, but we want to check with that. The third guideline really ties in with our loving kindness practice and our compassion practice. And this is a challenge. Can I have every moment of my speech and communication come from a grounding in kindness and compassion? Even if I'm just having very normal communication, can I speak out of care and love? I remember once the person who sat in the redwood tree for a long time, Julia Butterfly Hill, she said, I try to have every action, including speech, come out of love. Can I do that? Can I have it come out of care? And what helps me to do this? This is from the Buddha. One avoids harsh language and abstains from it. One speaks such words as are gentle, soothing to the ear, loving, such words as go to the heart, are courteous, friendly, and agreeable to many. So again, we watch out for speech in which we're disconnected from our hearts, and we really try to practice this. A lot of it is more the intention to practice. Like I have been for the last few years, I have an intention when I teach and when I often go to meetings or even just to a conversation, particularly one that might be challenging. I have the intention to bring in kindness and to bring in empathy, to really want to understand the other person or other persons. And so a lot of the work with these guidelines is bringing them into our intentions. We can bring them in, again, before a conversation, before a meeting. Intentions are really crucial with wise speech. Intentions don't guarantee that we'll be wise and loving and caring, but they help. They keep on reminding us. And so even a practice like reminding ourselves of the four guidelines in the morning and in the afternoon could be very helpful, or writing them down. I would, when I would go to meetings, I would often write down the guidelines on a piece of paper to try to remember them. And so very crucial for our speech and communication is a regular loving kindness practice, perhaps a regular compassion practice that keep us more and more connected to the hearts. The fourth guideline is appropriateness of speaking. So the Buddha talked about ways of speaking that would help, that would tend to go into greed, hatred, delusion. It would be ways of speaking where we're maybe speaking negatively about a third person with a friend or colleague or whatever. We want to watch out. Is my speaking, supporting my negativity, my being judgmental, and so forth? And we might not go there. It might be really looking at speech which just has me totally going in circles, not so helpful. Joseph Goldstein said he once had a practice which he tried for a week of not talking about a third party with another person. And he said much of his speech wasn't there, actually. And a really key support for this is asking, this is in many ways was central to what the Buddha meant by appropriateness. Is this the right time to have this conversation? If I'm really caught in reactivity, should I postpone the conversation till tomorrow or next week? And so actually something like just asking, is this the right time for the conversation, is a really central part of our speech practice. How do we practice with this? We might take one of the guidelines and work with it for a week or a month. I once worked with a group where we worked with these guidelines for 6 months. We worked with each of the 4 guidelines for a month, and then the last 2 months we brought them all together. Remembering the guidelines in the morning. You can do this for a week. You could work just with one guideline, work with several of them, and so forth. One person I worked with, when she was going to have a difficult conversation with her teenage daughter, she would write the guidelines on her hand and she'd be looking at it as she talked to her daughter, right? You can, again, have it on the wall by your telephone and so forth. And we can really ask, as we do this, as we work with the guidelines, is there one guideline that I'm better at than the others? Which of these needs most attention? As we work with the guidelines, we'll see that we're sometimes better with others. When I'm very busy, I'm often very good with being helpful and being truthful, but my heart's sometimes not there. If I'm really busy and even thinking I want to finish this conversation, right, quickly or something like that. So just seeing which of the guidelines are stronger, which are weaker, which do I need to develop more. And then the last foundation I want to mention is about learning more. It's really related to the first foundation. How can I be more mindful with my speech? So much of mindful communication, skillful communication, is knowing how to be skillful. Maybe when I have a difficult emotion come up or a difficult thought, when I notice myself being judgmental, again, how can I gradually have more mindfulness in the middle of speaking? And know, again, very much related to the first one of having relational awareness, but this is more actually having an active mindfulness that knows what's going on when I'm speaking, that can recognize what's happening. And it's only when I can be mindful that I can actually respond skillfully. Know that if I know what's going on, if I know that I'm really angry and what I say isn't going to be skillful, maybe I can say that. Some of the bringing of mindfulness into our speech is simply saying what's happening in the moment, right? Again, a lot of this is going to depend on the nature of the relationship. If I'm close to people, I can say something like, after you said that, I felt some anger. And you can just say it like that. And if you have, especially if you're both practitioners, it can just change things. And, maybe the other person says, yeah, I hear you. Do you want to just pause for a minute and sit with the anger and see what comes through? So we can, pausing is an amazing technique to use when we speak. Sometimes we're with people and they might do the same. Sometimes we need to do it. Maybe that we're in a meeting and other people aren't into skillful speech necessarily. And it's really helpful for me because I'm caught in reactivity to pause. One of the techniques I recommend very strongly in that kind of setting is taking a pause through taking a bathroom break. At a meeting, potentially take many bathroom breaks. It's very, very awkward socially for people to comment on how many times you go to the bathroom. This is an old technique suggested first by the Buddha. No, I'm joking. That's not true. But I'm serious. It can be a really, really helpful technique. How can I work, particularly with challenging states that come up? Pause, be mindful, and of course, this is going to be dependent on a regular mindfulness practice. The way we can practice with this is to practice first with situations where there's a little bit of difficulty, not too much. Don't just work with the really hard ones. You're noticing yourself a little bit irritated. Maybe you just had a conversation with someone. Can you do a pause? Say, can we talk can we talk tomorrow? And then pause and check into what you're experiencing. So there's a lot more I could say about this, but I hope that's helpful in terms of really giving 3 core foundations. The first is developing the ability to be present in the midst of speaking, develop relational awareness, relational mindfulness. Secondly, work with the 4 guidelines. And thirdly, develop the capacity to be mindful, particularly of difficult moments that come up, difficult experiences, work with pauses, and that would segue, if we had more time, we would have a whole segment on how do we work with difficult situations in our communication. And when I teach retreats, we work with the foundations, maybe the first 4 days, and the last 2 or 3 days, we work with how do we work with difficulties in communication, including doing role plays. With a lot of fun. And sometimes we actually, in the retreats, we deliberately invite people to tell them what would trigger them. And we have other people say something that would trigger them. And then the person who designed the trigger gets to respond skillfully. I'm not going to do that today, but it can be really, so the retreats are actually tons of fun to really work with skillful speech. So let me finish with the way that the great Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh expressed the guideline of wise speech. I'll close with this and then we'll open things up. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I vow to cultivate loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and relieve others of their suffering. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I vow to learn to speak truthfully with words that inspire self-confidence, joy, and hope. Let's just sit quietly now for a moment. And just let there be whatever may have resonated with you, whatever seems helpful. Let it be there. Maybe along with any questions you have or anything you want to share. Let's take about a minute, minute and a half just to be in silence. So we have about 15 minutes now. If anyone has a question or something to share, and let's invite this time to be a time of practicing wise speech, skillful speech. It might be that you want to stay as you're listening, just with some background awareness, maybe keep the awareness of the hands. Notice what comes up if with your mindfulness. So let me invite you, if you want to either raise the physical hand or do the raised hand function. Anyone want to share something or ask something about my talk, or maybe something I didn't talk about? Maybe a situation that you have that's challenging? And half-baked questions are welcome. Doesn't have to be fully baked. Please, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Donald. Thanks so much for your talk and for sharing your thoughts. And I can do half-baked questions pretty well, so
Great.
if you don't mind. So I like the idea of these guidelines, and I've heard them in different forms. And the one that I always struggle with the most is the helpful one, kind
Yeah.
of knowing whether or not I should say something. And, the more kind of serious the discussion, the harder it is sometimes to know whether or not I want to put my opinion out there,
Yeah.
and share it with another person. And so I just wondered if you had any thoughts or techniques you use to kind of um, balance that out in your mind before you actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I'm sure the question is shared by many. When the Buddha actually talked about what's translated as helpful, there wasn't that much there. Most of what he has is to make sure that you don't have negative intentions, that you're not doing something that might be harmful or coming out of even, I think one of the translations of one part of the passage was even being malicious, being negative. So it was more, he talked more about the opposite of being helpful than about what characterizes the helpfulness. But I would say that it's really, I think, a lot to ask about your motivation. So that's a little bit different from making kind of the objective assessment that what I'm going to say would be helpful. So I think it's probably more about the intention. Do I have an intention to be helpful, or am I maybe just trying to get airtime, right? Sometimes that might be the case. Do I think that I actually have something that could contribute? Maybe I'm not sure. Then I could, just try it and see what happens and keep learning from it. But I think a lot of it's going to come back to intention. Is my intention to be helpful with that point, or is it coming out of some other place? So really tune into the intention, sometimes even sit with it a little bit. That could be helpful. Yeah, how does that sound, Mike?
Yeah, no, that's good advice. I like that, and sometimes like coming at it another day, you know, like let me think about this overnight and come back. But
Yeah, yeah, and if you're not sure, maybe have a
yeah,
guide.
if you're not sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I was gonna say, so the intention thing, yeah, it's like sometimes it's difficult to tell whether I'm really trying to, like, if it comes to a family member or someone, and whether am I really trying to help them or am I just being critical, you know? And
Yeah,
so, like what you were saying makes sense to me.
yeah,
So,
just
so
ask
thanks for that.
and check in the intention. Do some experiments where maybe sometimes you don't speak and think about it later. So do some experiments where you kind of feel in the middle. Maybe go one way sometimes and the other way sometimes. And take it as a learning experiment. Interesting.
All
Yeah,
right,
thank you.
thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Others, you can just either raise your hand or use the raise hand function. How many people have a conscious, wise speech practice yourself, at least to some extent? Yeah. Yeah. What do you find helpful? Anyone want to share? Yeah, it looks like Robin wanted to add something. Yeah.
I didn't really want to add something. Excuse me, I have laryngitis thinking of wise speech, but oftentimes with family members, I might ask, um, would you like me to share, or would you like my opinion on something, or would you like me just to listen?
That's great. Yeah, really sometimes, letting the other people have a sense of whether it would be helpful or well received. That sounds like a really helpful addition to all of this. Again, I haven't gone so much into working with challenges, but that could be really, really helpful in a certain situation. In some ways, asking them whether they would find it helpful to have my perspective on a given concern or issue. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Molly, please.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. That's just it's such a good topic. Just a couple things. First, like the timing was not a foundation that I had in my mind. Like the other three, I kind of did.
Yeah,
And so that's really helpful for me because I always feel the need to like get it resolved like right at that time and not, it's that reactivity thing, like just kind of can't let it go. And I realize sometimes if I can take the time, yeah, that sort of really helps. So speaking of challenges, I have a family member who I would characterize as being very snarky. She just makes snarky remarks. And I
yeah,
recognize that I had that in myself before I really started practicing.
yeah.
And so when that comes up, there have been a couple times where I've just kind of said to her, I felt like in a kind way, but I said, I feel like you're being snarky. And yeah, and I think it kind of takes somebody back. I don't know. I don't know if that's a skillful way to respond. When I hear people who are not like my family member being that way, I will just try to guide the conversation in another way.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
yeah. Um, I remember that comment with Ram Dass. All of his decades of spiritual practice goes out the window with family sometimes. Um, with your family member, yeah, there's a whole area that I didn't go into so much, which is a really central foundation, which is empathy. And empathy can coexist with disagreement. But empathy is really tuning in, and this comes out of our integration of the Buddha's wise speech practice with nonviolent communication. Empathy is a way of tuning into what matters for the other person. And there's going to be something that matters that's genuine. With empathy practice, we distinguish between what matters for someone that's something positive and the strategy that they use to get it, which may be very unskillful.
Mhm.
So a person may be a facilitator at a meeting and have the very valuable goal of being efficient with the meeting and may be a control freak. If I'm being empathic with that person, I want to connect with what matters in terms of the efficiency, right? And so there may be something you can connect with. I probably would suggest using another term than snarky.
Yeah, I know, not a skillful word. Yes.
Maybe you thought that right after you said that.
Oh, I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah.
As I say, I recognize that in myself, that I can be, I can be that way, much less so now, but
Right,
yeah.
because when people have a sense that the other person is being judgmental, it's very hard for most people to listen to anything,
Hmm.
right? And so you want to check out, am I in a place where I actually want to connect with this person, understand the person, and communicate? And if not, it's probably not good timing,
Yeah.
right? And then can I be empathic? And that might not be possible with certain kinds of difficult situations. But can I be empathic, which means you're coming more from your heart and framing your language so that it's in terms of your experience rather than making a judgmental comment about the other.
Mm.
When you said that, when you said this, you know, I felt confused or I felt angry. So make it in terms of your own experience, not assessing the other's experience. Those could give a lot more guidelines, but those are a few.
That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the main thing is come from your heart in your own way, which
Mhm.
means you wouldn't be judgmental. Be very careful about any language which could be interpreted as judgmental.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Time for one or two more.
Hi, this is Kendra. Can you hear me okay?
And yeah,
Hi, Don. Thank you so much for the talk. I really got a lot out of that. This is an area that I try to be very mindful about, but often get a little carried away in communication, not
yeah,
only by emotion, but just, well, I guess mostly by emotion. Anyways, I have a difficult relationship with a coworker who has created kind of some difficulty for me in my role. And now there's some mediation that has to happen.
yeah,
There was a list sent to me of complaints, and some of them are outright lies. Some of them are, kind of misconstrued, but I'm going to have to kind of go through these things in mediation. And I'm very afraid
yeah,
of losing kind of the control over my speech and not getting worked up. And I don't have a lot of practice in terms of being in challenging situations and have practicing right speech. It's hard enough in just day-to-day life, right? So I'm just curious, kind of that's going to happen in a couple weeks. If you had any like quick guidance that could help me get through that.
okay. A few things occur to me. In the long run, we develop in skillful speech in difficult situations by practicing in easier situations. That's how all types of training occur. We practice mindfulness when we're on our own rather than, on a loud bus, right? And so practicing the foundations of wise speech, we learn especially with easier situations. So I would say take advantage of all the easier situations in the next 2 weeks. That's number one. And in the long run, keep on practicing where it's not so hard. What we do in our retreats, for example, we typically have 6 or 7 day retreats, and we do 4 days, or maybe first 2/3 with the foundations, and then the last third applying them to daily life. And I'm sorry, applying them to challenges, I should say, and doing some of the things I mentioned earlier. I would probably emphasize, since it's pretty soon, just trying to think of, out of the different tools that I used, think of the one or two or three that seem most helpful and practice with them, as much as works in the next 2 weeks. Maybe it's working with the guideline of being truthful. Maybe it's, maybe it's trying to have some degree of knowing what's going on internally so you can not speak when you're going through a lot of reactivity, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, so you can practice like that. If it's possible, maybe someone else in the Sangha, you could do some role playing where you kind of practice with the difficult situations that you might encounter. Ask someone close to you, could you I don't know how many people are involved, but try to do a role play where you might actually experience some of the challenges, maybe being triggered.
Right, right. I do
Yeah.
have some of that set up, but thank you. That's, I think, a great idea to
Yeah.
kind of do a mock situation. It's
Yeah.
tough when people are bringing up things about you that aren't truthful.
Yeah.
And I don't like the idea of being so reactive about it. I wish that the goal would be to maintain a level of calm, but there's something just kind of, I don't know, inherent in hearing things about yourself that are not
Yeah.
like really negative and kind of, yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely doing the role playing. I think is a great idea. Thank you. And I think the biggest thing for me, I think, is paying attention to the internal state, because
Yeah.
I can feel like the adrenaline start. And so I wish I'm liking the bathroom idea.
Yeah.
So I like that.
A lot during the mediation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I actually have, I think, two more thoughts. One of them is, see this as part of a lifetime of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And know that you're committed for the long haul to develop skillful speech. You'll do your best with this. It's in 2 weeks. You'll do your best, but think of this as potentially a learning experience. I'm sure you'll do some things skillfully, and some things will be harder, and that's natural. And then the other piece is, I'll mention this really for the whole group. In the summer of 2023, I had just taught I think it was maybe a 5 or 6 day wise speech retreat. And I was inspired, and I gave a series of talks for Spirit Rock on Wednesdays, which we put on Dharma Seed, and which went into more depth and gave more material than I did tonight. And those are on Dharma Seed under my name. Do people know the website Dharma Seed?
I
It's,
do. Yeah.
yeah, DharmaSeed. And if you look to under my name, this goes for anyone, for July and August of 2023, I gave 4 talks on wise speech. You might hear possibly the same joke that I gave tonight. You'll see, but you can be okay with that. But there is also, I think I put on the website there, several handouts, and I went into detail on empathy practice. So I'm really saying this for the whole group, that if you want to go further with this, that's one way of doing that. That there'll be some material there I didn't cover today, and also some handout material that you could work with. Okay, so Kendra, there may be something of value there. Don't do too much, but I think just focusing on 1 or 2 or 3 things to develop, which it sounds like you have a good handle on that. So good luck.
Thank you so much. I'll check those out too. I appreciate that.
Maybe after 2 weeks, let me know how it goes.
Will do. Will do. I
Okay.
agree. I do. I am looking at it as a learning experience, and I'm trying to approach it with some curiosity as well, because I've never been through something like this. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Thank
Yeah,
you.
good. Great. So I think we're at time now. So is this a little bit after the hour and a half time? Are we okay to finish now, Irene? So let me finish with a few things. First of all, thank you in advance for Donna. I think we have the information on Donna in the chat. And then secondly, let me invite everyone to set your intention coming out of our session today. What have you learned? What have you explored? What's been maybe catalyzed that you'd like to bring into your practice? Remembering that there's also a handout, a link to a handout, or link to a Google Doc where you can download a handout that gives 2 pages of information and some quotes on wise speech. So ask yourself, how do I want to continue what we've explored this evening? Just in your own way, take a minute or so now and reflect on that. And then in closing, I want to thank everyone who's given support for this evening. Stephen and Irene, and I'm forgetting the name of our technician.
Ian.
Ian. Yeah, so Irene and Stephen and Ian, thank you so much for all your support and all the communications before today to set everything up. And I want to close with the dedication of merit, which is really remembering the horizon of our practice, that we practice for ourselves very much, but we also practice for others. Ultimately, the horizon is we practice for the benefit of all beings. May the benefits of our time together be offered very much to ourselves, but then beyond ourselves, be offered to all beings, knowing that all beings includes us. So thank you so much. Feel free, if you'd like, to unmute and say goodbye. I'll do my little wave if you want to
Thank
do
you
it.
so much, Donald.
Bye.
Bye.
You.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Donald,
Appreciate you.
thank you.
Till next time.